today's lecture. We have seen recently two cases of pulmonary embolism. So to review this topic, I would like to discuss the pulmonary embolism definition, risk factors, pathogenesis, presentation, diagnosis, investigation, and management. Just to briefly talk about pulmonary circulation, there is pulmonary artery coming from the right ventricle, which divides into left and right pulmonary artery, then to subsegmental arteries, and ultimately through pulmonary venous circulation, that reaches to the left atrium. So anywhere obstruction in the main pulmonary artery or subsegmental arteries will give rise to increase in RV afterward and decrease RV perfusion.
Can I request?
Yes.
Loudly and slowly.
Yes.
I am getting deaf.
Sorry. So definition of pulmonary. So occlusion of pulmonary artery or multiple arteries by blood flow which leads to pulmonary embolism results from deep venous thrombosis that have broken off and traveled to the pulmonary arterial circulation. Pulmonary embolism is one of the leading cause of preventable deaths in hospitalized patients. Generally, the source of the pulmonary embolism is deep venous thrombosis from proximal veins. Thrombus get dislodged and it comes to the pulmonary arteries. Another cause is infective endocarditis of the right side of the heart. Vegetations will lead to embolization and clog the pulmonary arteries. Other causes are air embolism, fat embolism, amniotic fluid embolism, septic embolism, and sometimes very rarely tumor embolization. So generally there is a virtuous triad pathologically, three main causes which leads to thrombosis in a local circulation, which is circulatory stasis, endothelial injury, and hypercoagulable states. This all collectively leads to thrombosis of any part of any circulation. So coming to risk factors of venous thromboembolism, mostly it is prevalent in three clinical conditions. Any major surgery which leads to immobilization, particularly cancer-related or hip and knee surgeries, acute stroke, major trauma leading to spinal cord injury which leads to paralysis. Other risk factors include prior deep venous thrombosis, congestive heart failure, malignancies of potential cause, obesity, smoking, estrogen pills, hormone replacement therapy, pregnancy is a hypercoagulable state, any lower limb surgery, orthopedic surgery, prolonged immobilization or traveling, and surgery requiring greater than 30 minutes of the general anesthesia. This all can lead to deep venous thrombosis. Other causes which are genetical causes which includes factor V Leiden mutation, protein C deficiency, protein S deficiency, antithrombin deficiency, antiphospholipid syndrome, and hyperhomocystinemia. Other ICU related factors which generally preventable causes are immobility, neuromuscular paralysis, central venous catheters, and severe sepsis. So this slide shows the hemodynamics of the pulmonary embolism. Generally, when there is a massive pulmonary embolism, 30 to 50% of the pulmonary artery circulations are affected, which leads to increase in afterload of the RV. So when there is an increase in afterload, the RV contraction will be prolonged due to RV wall tension and increased afterload. So it will lead to increased RV O2 demand. So myocardial ischemia will be produced, which leads to RV dysfunction. Another mechanism is that increased RV contraction will lead to flattening of the septum, so which further reduces the RV cardiac output. So combining RV cardiac output decrease and LV preload decreases, so ultimately systemic cardiac output will decrease. So it will lead to decrease in systemic blood pressure, which also leads to decrease in coronary perfusion pressure. So RV perfusion also decrease. So it is a vicious cycle which leads to RV ischemia also. So collectively, these all mechanisms leads to RV dysfunction. There are three clinical presentations of pulmonary embolism: small, intermediate pulmonary embolism, and massive pulmonary embolism. Generally, small pulmonary embolisms are asymptomatic or generally have only shortness of breath. Massive pulmonary embolism will come into the severe circulatory collapse, shock, severe central chest pain, sometimes present with syncope, pallor, sweating, central cyanosis, elevated jugular venous pressure, loud second heart sound which is pulmonary sound, asto-split and gallop rhythm. An intermediate pulmonary embolism which presents with hemoptysis, pleuritic chest pain, tachycardia, tachypnea and pleural gum.
Nothing is important.
What's
And high degree of suspicious.
Exactly. Clinical suspicion is the most important thing.
All this thing comes later on.
Definitely, sir.
If you don't think with the mind, you will miss it.
Definitely, sir. This ESC 2019 guideline gives clear-cut definition of obstructive shock and persistent hypertension in case of pulmonary embolism, which is systolic BP less than 90 mm Hg or vasopressors required to achieve BP greater than 90 mm of mercury despite adequate filling status, and any end organ hyperperfusion includes altered mental status, cold clammy skin, oliguria and increased serum lactate. And persistent hypertension is defined as systolic BP less than 90 mm of mercury or systolic BP drop of more than 40 mm of mercury, either lasting longer than 15 minutes and not caused by new onset arrhythmia, hypovolemia or sepsis. So persistent hypertension or obstructive shock is a alarming thing in pulmonary embolism. To suspect pulmonary embolism, there is Wells criteria, which includes first any evidence of DVT like leg swelling, pain or erythema. It has 3 points. Pulmonary embolism is on a first differential diagnosis clinically, then it has 3 points. Heart rate greater than 100 has 1.5 points. Immobilization greater than 3 days or surgery in last 4 weeks, which have 1.5 points. Hemoptysis has 1 point and cancer, evidence of cancer has 1 point. So if collectively score is more than 4, then pulmonary embolism is very likely diagnosis. If it is less than 4, then you can think of alternative diagnosis. So coming to this approach, if score is less than 4, then go for D-dimer test. D-dimer has a very good negative predictive value. If it comes negative in your emergency department or ICU setting, then pulmonary embolism is almost ruled out. If it comes high, then it has various causes. So go for CT pulmonary angiography. If CT comes positive for pulmonary embolism, then treat according to it. Coming to differential diagnosis of pulmonary embolism, it includes myocardial infarction, pneumonia, bronchitis, pneumothorax, and costochondritis. Coming to investigations, general investigations includes CBC, coagulation profile, ESR, LDH, and arterial blood gas analysis. D-dimer is sensitive but not specific. Up to 80% of the ICU patients have elevated D-dimer in absence of venous thromboembolism. The absolute cutoff value is 500 microgram per liter. But nowadays ESC guidelines recommend age-adjusted D-dimer level. That is above 50 years of age, there is into 10. If age is 60, then 60 into 10, 600 is the cutoff. If age is 70, then 72, then 700 is the cutoff. Generally, ECG signs, this S1, Q3, T3 pattern is very much specific but not that sensitive. Generally, we find sinus tachycardia, right bundle branch block, T-wave inversion in V1 to V4, that is RV pressure overload signs. That are the frequent findings. S1, Q3, T3 is a specific finding. In X-ray, there are multiple findings. We can suspect pulmonary embolism by showing the elevated diaphragm, enlarged mediastinum, cardiomegaly, pleural effusion. Specific signs are Westermarck signs and Hampton-Hum sign. Westermarck sign is pulmonary oliguria and Hampton-Hum is wet pleural-based infiltrates, occasionally seen in pulmonary embolism. Here, right costophrenic angle shows the Hampton-Hum sign. Lower limb venous system ultrasonography is to diagnose the deep venous thrombosis is very essential. It detects thrombus and we can suspect the pulmonary embolism very much. Other specific tests are generally VQ scan, that is ventilation perfusion scan, not available easily, but it has a lower radiation exposure and accurate diagnosis can be established. Pulmonary
investigation.
Yes, sir.
Before coming to the India, vanished.
Okay.
In our time, we were thinking of a diffuse scan, which was not available. And hence, this is theoretical, extreme things for India.
Definitely. In India, sir, CT pulmonary angiography is easily available, widespread, and can easily done in emergency and departments also. So CT pulmonary angiography will give you accurate diagnosis. It has lower rate of inconclusive results and may provide alternate diagnosis if pulmonary embolism is excluded. But the weaknesses are radiation exposure, iodine contrast, so we cannot easily do in the renal impairment patients. Tendency to overuse because of easy acceptability, and clinical relevance of CTPA diagnosis. Subsegmental P is unknown. So subsegmental P sometimes we miss on that CT. This is the CT angiography film which shows thrombus in both pulmonary arteries. This is the gold standard pulmonary angiography. Now it is not done. It shows thrombus in pulmonary arteries. Other important tests and bedside tests are echocardiography and cardiac troponin. I would like to discuss some parameters of RV pressure overload due to pulmonary embolism. First, in this parasternal long axis view, we can see the RV enlargement. In a 4-chamber view, dilated RV with basal RV and LV ratio greater than 1, and McConnell sign, which is immobile RV apex and free base wall. That is the very specific sign in 4-chamber view. Another thing is flattened interventricular septum in parasternal short axis view. Due to RV pressure overload, the interventricular septum gets flattened. And dilated inferior vena cava with diminished inspiratory collapsibility in subcostal. These 4 are echocardiographic signs. Other Doppler signs includes there is 60 by 60 sign, which has a coexistence of acceleration time of pulmonary ejection less than 60 milliseconds and mid-systolic notch with elevated less than 60 milligram pressure of peak systolic gradient of tricuspid valve. So greater than 60 milligram is with an error. Another thing is right heart mobile thrombus detected in right heart cavity. Sometimes we do detect it, and that is called TAPSE, which is decreased tricuspid annular plane systolic excursion, which is seen in M mode. If it is less than 16 millimeter, it suggests RV dysfunction. Tissue Doppler imaging has decreased peak systolic velocity, which is of less than 9.5 centimeter per second on tricuspid annulus. So these all signs suggest RV dilatation and RV dysfunction because of pulmonary embolism. So we can easily do a bedside and suspect pulmonary embolism. Coming to management, there are 2 types of management. First is emergency management and second is anticoagulation and thrombolysis. So first, if patient comes into cardiopulmonary arrest, first ABC, airway breathing and circulation, oxygen 100%, IV access, send baseline bloods, including clotting profile, analgesia, management of cardiogenic shock with fluid and inotrops. Generally, thrombolytic therapy is used. Streptokinase, urokinase, and recombinant tissue terminal activator is used. Dose of streptokinase is 250,000 units over 30 minutes, followed by 1 lakh unit per hour infusion over 12 to 24 hours. Anticoagulant therapy includes heparin, which has 5,000 to 10,000 units IV loading dose, then 1,000 units per hour IV infusion drip. Generally, it is given for 7 to 10 days or till clinical improvement. Anticoagulant therapy, warfarin is preferred in some cases, and nowadays NOAC are preferred most probably. Generally, warfarin is 2.5 to 7.5 milligram per day orally. Started with heparin to overlap the doses. Duration is generally 3 to 6 months, and INR should be monitored. NOAC used the rivaroxaban, dabigatran, and apixaban. Rivaroxaban has 15 milligram BD for 21 days, then 20 milligram OD. Dabigatran 110 milligram BD and apixaban 5 milligram BD. Surgical treatment are surgical embolectomy and catheter embolectomy for massive life-threatening pulmonary embolisms. Recurrent pulmonary embolism and proximal DVT has indication for vena cava filter, so we can prevent further clogging of the pulmonary artery by inserting a filter to femoral or jugular veins. Main thing is prevention. Prophylaxis is the single most important measure. Compressive stockings, anticoagulation and aspirin in ICU patients, management of risk factors and regular follow-up. So coming to now recent guidelines of 2019 for pulmonary embolism. First, it includes rescue thrombolytic therapy. So they say that if patient is not hemodynamically unstable, then do not thrombolize patient until it deteriorates. First, try oral anticoagulants and heparin. Then, if patient deteriorates clinically, then rescue thrombolytic can be used. It is a class 1 indication now. Previously, it is class 2A indication. Surgical embolectomy and catheter-directed treatment should be considered as alternative to rescue thrombolytic therapy for patients who deteriorate hemodynamically. It is a class 2A indication. D-dimer measurement and clinical prediction rules should be considered to rule out pulmonary embolism during pregnancy and postpartum period. And further evaluation may be considered for asymptomatic pulmonary embolism survivors who are at increased risk of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. As I said, D-dimer test according to age-adjusted cutoff should be used. And VQ spec may be considered for pulmonary embolism diagnosis in a class 2B indication. Coming to new recommendation in acute phase treatment, when oral anticoagulant is initiated, patient who is with pulmonary embolism who is eligible for NOAC is recommended form of anticoagulant treatment now. And ECMO may be considered in combination with surgical embolectomy or catheter-directed treatment in refractory circulatory collapse or cardiac arrest. Chronic treatment and prevention of recurrence of patient without cancer. It includes indefinite treatment with vitamin K antagonist in patients with antiphospholipid antibody syndrome and extended anticoagulation, that is 12 to 24 months therapy, considered as a patient who has no identifiable risk factor for the index TE event. And reduced dose of apixaban and rivaroxaban should be considered after first 6 months. So after 6 months you can switch over for rivaroxaban 20 to 10 and apixaban 5 mg to 2.5 mg. In patients with cancer, rivaroxaban or edoxaban should be considered as alternative to low molecular weight heparin, with exception of patient with gastrointestinal cancer, because gastrointestinal cancer has very high bleeding risk. So NOACs are avoided in that cases. Pulmonary embolism in pregnancy, amniotic fluid embolism should be considered in a pregnant or postpartum woman with unexplained hemodynamic stability, respiratory deterioration, and disseminated intravascular coagulation. Thrombolysis or surgical embolectomy should be considered for pregnant women with high risk of pulmonary embolism. 2019 guidelines say that NOAC are not recommended during pregnancy and lactation, but recently some reports are coming that NOACs are safe in lactation, not in pregnancy. Post-pulmonary embolism care and long-term sequelae includes routine clinical evaluation is recommended every 3 to 6 months after acute pulmonary embolism, and it is recommended to refer symptomatic patient with mismatched perfusion defects on VQ scan beyond 3 months after acute PE to pulmonary hypertension or chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension expert center. Generally, if there are any signs of RV pressure overload after some 3 months or 6 months, we should evaluate for CTEPH. Recommendation for diagnosis includes in suspected high-risk pulmonary embolism as indicated by presence of hemodynamic instability, bedside echo or emergency CTP are recommended for diagnosis. And it is recommended that IV anticoagulation with unfractionated heparin, including a weight-adjusted bolus dose, should be initiated without delay with any patient with suspected high risk of pulmonary embolism. D-dimer is generally high risk, everything it is age-adjusted cutoff, age into 10 microgram per liter in patient greater than 50 years should be calculated. VQ scan, as I discussed, it is generally we should start cautious volume loading. Generally 500 ml of saline should be given in 15 to 30 minutes, and it is considered in patient with normal to central venous pressure. If it is concomitant hypovolemia, if central venous pressure is low, we should give IV fluid. If we overload the patient with volume, then volume overloading can overdistend the RV and the ventricular interdependence will worsen, which leads to decreased cardiac output. So it will end up into the shock. Vasopressors use norepinephrine and dopamine according to dosages. ECMO should be used in case of total circulatory arrest. So rapid ECMO and patient can be taken for surgical embolectomy or catheter-directed thrombolysis. Generally, thrombolytic doses RTPA is recommended, which is 100 mg over 2 hours, and streptokinase 250,000 units as a loading dose over 30 minutes, followed by 1 lakh unit per hour over 12 to 24 hours. Another is accelerated regimen, which includes 1.5 million international unit of streptokinase over 2 hours. Urokinase is rapid acting, 4,400 unit per kilogram as a loading dose over 10 minutes, followed by 4,400 international unit per kg per hour for another 12 to 24 hours. And in that accelerated regimen includes 3 million international units over 2 hours. So, as I said, this is all recommendation class 1 indication for anticoagulation, thrombolytic therapy, and surgical pulmonary embolectomy is recommended for patients with high risk of pulmonary embolism in whom thrombolysis is contraindicated or has failed. So, it is a class 1 indication. And catheter directed therapy, percutaneous catheter directed therapy is class 2A indication. Norepinephrine and dopamine should be considered in patients with high risk of pulmonary embolism, and ECMO may be considered it is a class 2B indication. Coming to initiation of anticoagulation, it should be started as early as possible, and if it is used parenterally, then LMWH or fondaparinux is recommended for most patients. When oral anticoagulation is started in patients with pulmonary embolism, NOAC should be choice in preference to vitamin K antagonist. When vitamin K antagonist is the treatment of choice, overlapping with parenteral anticoagulation is recommended until INR is 2.5, and NOAC are not recommended in patients with severe renal impairment during pregnancy and lactation and patients with antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. Rescue thrombolytic therapy is a class 1 indication, and surgical and percutaneous catheter directed thrombolysis is class 2A indication. IVC filter. IVC filter should be considered in patients with acute pulmonary embolism, absolute contraindication to anticoagulation. And IVC filters also should be considered in pulmonary embolism recurrence despite therapeutic anticoagulation. Routine use of IVC filter is not recommended. So this chart showing that high risk patients should be immediately taken to reperfusion treatment with hemodynamic support